this week's episode of the Bronx Agoge, I like to call Not So Rad. So, it's 1986. I'm 11. My younger brother is 9 at the time of this event. We're on Webster Avenue in the Bronx, riding our bike from where we were living at the time, which is an apartment building on Bedford Park Boulevard. And we're going to a store that is no longer there, that years later I would actually open up a martial arts school right adjacent to. But at the time, was on Webster Avenue, some ways away from where we lived. And it was called Honig's. So Honig's was one of these old school, like department store types of businesses, where they would have an appliance section, they would have a sports section, they would have a men's clothing section, etc., etc. Very similar to like a Woolworths used to be back in the day. And this particular Honig's had a bike section that would fix and repair a lot of troubles that you would have with your bikes. So at the time, we had just finished, the months prior to this, seeing the very popular movie of 1986, Rad. So if you saw Rad, it is a teenage BMX love story. That is the best way to put it. But one of the things it did was make BMX, racing and BMX bike riding very, very popular at the time, especially to impressionable 11 and 9-year-olds. So my brother and I pretty much begged our parents to buy us dirt bikes. So I had an impressive dirt bike of my own, but my brother's bike was something to behold. It had the same colors as the movie Rad's bike. Neon greens and bright 1980s sort of color schemes. And it was a hell of a lot louder than it was impressive functionally. But a cool bike nonetheless. I recall him having a handbrake, which was not very typical in a lot of bikes that we had back then. Usually it was the pedal brake, where you sort of steer backwards and the brake gets activated. So he had a handbrake on his. He had pegs on his. Now pegs, as ridiculously unimpressive as they seem now, were the bee's knees back in '86, because basically nobody could afford them. So if they didn't come with the bike, you didn't have them. But lo and behold, we were going to Honig's to have my tire fixed, and I was riding his bike with him on the back, holding my bike to Honig's, where I would get my tire fixed. We were heading back, each riding our own bikes on the way back. It was on that way back that we were stopped, or our attention was called by these two Hispanic young men. Now, although they probably weren't much taller than I was at the time, they were probably late teens, early 20s age-wise. Very, very strong Spanish accents, probably Mexicans. There's a thing in the Bronx where, whether you're from Central or South America, if you're a small brown guy that speaks Spanish, we call you Mexican. So I use the very figurative, Mexican when describing these two individuals. But they call our attention, and my brother and I, being, 11 and 9, not exactly very experienced in the way of the streets, and really having a good manners sort of side to who we are and how we were taught to be, we asked the men what they had wanted, at which time one of them asked if we had the time. The old "do you have the time" talk. Well, we stopped, and I thought to myself, I do have a watch that's in my pants. It was one of those old school stopwatches, right, that I thought was like the best. I had like high end NASA technology, you know, because I had this little stopwatch that could do a timer, stopwatch, all that other stuff. And I said, yeah. And I said, let me take out my stopwatch that also told the time. At which point, one of the men grabbed the front of my handlebars while the other one pulled my brother off of his bike, jumped on it, and started pedaling away. I was in shock. I didn't realize what had happened. At no point leading up to that moment did I even expect or anticipate or even have any inkling of understanding of the difference in energy that was happening when we had gone over. Completely caught me by surprise. My brother's screaming at the top of the lungs as the young man rides his bike away. And it didn't take long after that snapshot in time that I came to the realization they're stealing our bikes. So I started screaming and cursing at the guy who was holding my bike. He let go and he ran. I guess I presented enough of a nuisance to him that he panicked and just said it's not worth it. Realistically, I'm 11 years old. He probably would have stomped my head in if we were on some side street, but we were on the very busy Webster Avenue and Bedford Park Boulevard in the Bronx. He proceeds to run. I look at my brother, who is now hysterically crying, having just had his bike stolen, and I looked at him and I said, I'm going to get it back. Determined as anybody. Any hero at the beginning of his journey, when he looks back to the village, right before he rides his horse over the horizon, looks back, it was with that degree of confidence that I looked at my brother and said, I'm going to get it back. Tears in my eyes welling up from the emotion of the event also. I turn, I look at the way that the guy went, and he went uphill on Bedford Park Boulevard toward the very popular Botanical Gardens of Bronx Zoo. That's the section of the Bronx we're in.
Yeah.
Well, I go up the hill after him. He certainly got a head start on me. He was pedaling with adult legs. You know, I had the very motivated legs of an 11-year-old, and I gave chase. At the top of the hill that we were first forced to climb, I thought I was going to lose him, not understand which direction he went, because it is a sort of fork in the road. When in the distance off to the right, I noticed him pedaling a bike. So in my mind, got him. No idea of what I was going to do if I were to catch up to him. No idea if he was going to where his friends were, if he had a weapon. I was 11. My little brother got his bike stolen, and I was going to make it right. I gave chase. I gave chase for about 2 hours. I lost him about 10 minutes into it. But for 2 hours, I rode my bike as fast as I could. At this point, exhausted, completely run out of tears, just spent, but not wanting to give up, because I promised my brother I'd get the bike back. It was at that 2 hour mark that I didn't decide to quit, but that I heard the siren of a cop car, the little boop boop.
Yeah.
To my side, and I look over, and there are police with my brother in the backseat. Obviously, somebody had called the cops. They picked up my brother, and they were now trying to look and find me. So the cops came outside and said, you know, listen, we're going to go find him. We're going to get that bike back. You know, get in the car. And I refused. I said, I'm not getting in the car. I have to find the guy. I'm going to look for the guy. And it got to the point where they had to grab me. And back in '86, this wasn't really an issue. They had to grab me by the back of my neck, pull me off the bike, throw me in the back of the car. They put my bike in their trunk, and they drove me and my brother home. We never did get the bike back. And I recall sitting in my room crying for hours, just because of the just whole, you know, just depressive, this hopelessness of the whole event. But it was at that time that I think I got my first lesson in understanding the nature of strangers, understanding the nature of why we need to hold virtuous our ability to stay aware during all times and all circumstances. And it's probably the impetus for me developing the outlook that I have on society to this very day. These people weren't my friends. These people weren't connected to me. I didn't know these people. I never saw them again. Why would I expose myself to vulnerability? Just because of a simple request by them to do so.